Hi, this is Mela from Mela Reads. Today I'm going to do a review of Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This book is really outside of my usual wheelhouse of what I would read, but I guess like many of you, I've seen it popping up everywhere, so I finally borrowed it on my app I have with my local library, actually as an audiobook, so I listened to it this week on my drives to and from work. And do you know what, even though it's outside of my usual wheelhouse, I wasn't even sure if I would stick with it because of that, but the plot really got me in, and I smashed it out because I just wanted to know what happened next. I've heard some people say that they found the plot very predictable. Lots of people did not finish it because they knew what would happen from the start. I'm not going to spoil the end of the book here in this review, but yeah, I think I just wanted to see how things played out, so I stuck with it, and I really enjoyed it for getting to the bottom of that. That said, I do have some thoughts about it, and I kind of get the impression from Goodreads that people either love or hate this book. People either think the prose is stunning, the characters are well developed, the plot is twisty and turny, the pacing is excellent, or they think that it's a little bit overwritten, the characters are flat, the pacing is inconsistent, the plot is familiar and predictable. So there's kind of two vastly different ends of the spectrum in the reviews on Goodreads. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars personally, and I'm just going to dig into why I chose the 3-star rating a little bit more today. So firstly, I just thought I'd read my Goodreads rating. This is outside of my usual wheelhouse, but the story definitely drew me in. It's quite nicely written overall, but I didn't feel emotionally moved by the story. The constant detailed descriptions of the natural world were a bit much for me. I felt the mid-century American South setting was both played up and not done particularly well at times. The court case seemed ridiculously full of leading questions, and the ending was too neatly packaged for my liking. So, on reflection, after I finished this book, I felt that it invoked something of the romantic tradition of literature. Not romance, but romantic, as in that sense of wonder, the natural world, and the beauty of nature, and you know, that sort of interconnectedness of man to nature. And I understand the appeal of that because we are increasingly disconnected from nature, even though it's something that's very innate for us to be amongst. But I do feel that this is overdone. For example, there is a scene where there's 2 lawmen discussing details of the investigation, and Owens describes the nearby oak roots as fists punching through the ground, and it just felt so superfluous in that scene. I understand in the marsh with Kaya, she's the marsh girl, she's a naturalist, she's studying the wildlife, the flora and fauna of the marsh, and she's painting it, and all of that sort of thing makes those descriptions really relevant. But when it's just, background to a dialogue scene, it seemed unnecessary. This kind of brings me up to trying to work out why Owens set this story in the time and place that she did. When you are writing a story and you're choosing a setting for it, there's got to be some interplay there. There's got to be some reason or appeal. So the where, we've got this defining character trait of Kaya of being the marsh girl. She's been living alone in the marsh for most of her life. And that setting is both what allows her to survive. It's also what sets her apart from all of the other characters in the book who don't live in the marsh, and it's where she finds her success, which is a whole other thing. But I think that I can accept that setting, the where, as being crucial to the story. It's the when that I struggle a little bit more with. So it's set in the 50s and 60s. And the marsh is in North Carolina, so in the American South. And as I said in my Goodreads review, I feel like this is both overwrought in terms of like the way the local dialect is used and the descriptions of southern food, like every time any characters eat. And then also not done particularly well. I felt that some details were a bit anachronistic, but I'm not super familiar with that time and place in the world, so that just may be my perspective or impression. But also the potential themes around civil rights and the roles of women were not explored in any meaningful way. I mean, unlike To Kill a Mockingbird, which is very much a product of that civil rights movement and explores that relationship between people of color in America and the white people, and this sort of attempts to touch on that at times, but it never does it well or in any way that evokes any emotional response from me. I almost found that the era, the time and place were romanticized in a different sense of the word, in that sort of same vein as what Edward Said refers to as exoticism or Orientalism. That's what I'm thinking of. That sort of othering of a group of people you don't understand that well, and you're seeing kind of their culture through a very coloured lens, whatever coloured lens you want to see it through. And so, yeah, the cooking sounds amazing, and the accents and the dialect can be endearing, and at the same time, I almost found that some of the characters were more like caricatures of what I might expect to see in that time and place. And for that reason, every time I see a mention of comparing this to Kill a Mockingbird, it is really disappointing, because I don't see how a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, where I think the characters are all very three-dimensional, they have their own motives, they're distinctive, and then a character like this where I feel that they are very flat caricatures, I just can't see it being a fair comparison at all. Okay, I wanted to pull out that Marsh Girl theme a little bit more. This might be a bit of a spoiler, so maybe just skip ahead. It's about Kaya's growth as a character. So Kaya, being the protagonist, starting off at 6 years old, and then the novel taking place over a period of about 15 or so years. She's certainly a young woman by the end of it. I found her angsty and immature and ungrateful for the love and support she did get from some people, and some of those traits could be written off as completely understandable given her family had all abandoned her. Her father had been abusive prior to abandoning her, and no one else had really ever reached out to give her any sort of affection or support. But given the time span the book is set over, I would expect to see some growth in a character beyond what I feel is one very tokenistic area of growth for Kaya, especially as she sort of broaches adolescence and comes into adulthood. That's like a crucial time of people developing and dealing with their issues, and that for me is my main problem with Kaya, that she doesn't grow. I saw her described in a couple of reviews as a manic pixie dream girl in the marsh, which upon reflection I can definitely see that. She's frequently described for her physical beauty. She's almost in some ways just a canvas for the young men in the novel to paint their desires onto. But like I said, I don't feel like any of the characters are very three-dimensional, so that's not just a Kaya specific problem. There were a couple of threads in the novel that I felt weren't explored as fully as they could have been, and therefore could have been just left out. So an example is frequent mentions of women needing like a girl gang, female friends. There are like mentions throughout the novel of this. Kaya never finds that, and then there's a tie-up at the end, like, well, she never got that, but she was okay with that. And it's like, why? She didn't even do anything to try and get that. It never became like an actual important part of the plot or her character. It makes no sense to me. And likewise, her witnessing an act of racism and her action towards the perpetrators is just like this random little anecdote thrown in. So I don't feel that, yes, as a cohesive whole, all of the things that were thrown out were done so for good reason, for the characters or the plot. That kind of ties into one of my other points, that I think this book was trying to be too many things for too many people. People who are trying to categorize it into a genre seem to be struggling. Like, is it like women's lit? Is it a romance? Is it YA? It reads a little like YA, but it's also like a courtroom drama and a coming of age story. And I think that that trying to be too many things is a weak point for this book. I also have a note here, what's the payoff for so much suspension of disbelief. So I mean that in terms of some of the things that happen in this book that aren't very logical or natural for people to do and say, and that happens in most fiction. There's always going to be plot conveniences, plot contrivances. Sometimes there'll be inconsistencies, and sometimes those make sense within the world of that piece of fiction. And usually I'm thinking Harry Potter is a really good example where all of those things occur very regularly, but the payoff is this really rich world, these really well-developed characters over time with excellent dialogue and this like real sort of sensual, it's similar in this, like a world is created for you. But I just think that the payoff in this book for suspending my belief so constantly wasn't worth it. My final point is the ending of the story. So I'm not going to spoil it, as I said. For me, I found it too neatly wrapped up. As I said in my review of Lady Chatterley's Lover, this is actually more dissatisfying for me than an open ending or a cliffhanger. I found this almost a cheap way of explaining things without giving Kaya or the other characters the room to live out some of the things that were tied up at the end. So for me, like I said in Lady Chatterley's Lover, a ending of a story, I want it to leave me wanting more and imagining more, and this was just like so neatly packaged that it was an anticlimax, and that's not what I want personally when I'm reading. So those are my thoughts. I'm interested to see if you agree or disagree with me on any points. Please let me know in the comments below, and apart from that, I'll see you next time. Bye.